Go ahead and be seated. So good morning. Good morning. Our reading today comes from the book of John. Jesus is at a wedding, and he seems to be just a guest, right? Like just everybody else. He doesn't seem to have any particular role or, to be of any particular importance at this wedding. The couple runs out of wine, and this would be a huge faux pas, right? And would cause the couple to be, and their whole family to become outcasts. And it's important to remember that when we see Jesus doing miracles, most of the time Jesus is making sure that people are included and not excluded. So Jesus heals people so that they can be restored as full participants in the community. He is breaking down barriers that isolate them. So for example, when we think about when Jesus healed the lepers, he is not only curing their disease, but he is allowing them to rejoin society and to worship in the temple. Because Jesus is always about restoration. He's restoring people to their full dignity as beloved children of God. And the same is true in this story. Jesus is restoring joy and honor to the wedding celebration, and he's ensuring that the hosts and the guests can remain connected at this special time, and he wants to make sure that no one is excluded from their own community. So the disciples are with Jesus at this wedding. In the first chapter of John, we see how the disciples start to follow Jesus, right? We have Andrew, who is a follower of John the Baptist, actually. And John the Baptist says, no, wait a minute, he's the one, go follow him. And so Andrew does. And then Andrew goes to get his brother, Simon Peter. And then Philip is the next to be called, and he invites Nathanael. And Nathanael initially sort of isn't quite sure about Jesus. And he's like, hey, wait a minute, isn't Jesus that guy, from Nazareth? I mean, he can't be the guy. But then after a really short conversation with Jesus, he totally has changed. And he says, quote, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. So at this stage, the disciples, they're intrigued, right? They sense that there might be something extraordinary about Jesus. Perhaps he is the military leader and the revolutionary that they've been waiting for, the one who will free Israel from oppression. Perhaps he is the Messiah. So they carry hopes and expectations about who Jesus might be. But I think at this stage, they're still in a wait and see. They're observing and wondering if Jesus will fulfill their hopes in all the ways that they imagine. They're on the outside looking in. They're curious, they're intrigued, and they're exploring, but they're not yet fully committed. And one of the things I love about this story is that after Jesus turns the water into wine, the writer of the Gospel of John adds this little sentence, and it says, Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The disciples believed in him. They moved from investigators to believers. With this miracle, they really saw Jesus for the first time, and they believed. Their lives were forever changed in that moment. So do you remember the first time that you really saw Jesus and that your life was forever changed? It might be many small moments, or it might be one big moment like this. One of the things that I get to do as a priest that I absolutely love is I get to hear people's stories. I love hearing about people's lives and where they encounter God. And I was recently talking with a gentleman. I will call him Sam. That is not his real name, but I will call him Sam. Sam did not grow up in a Christian home or around Christianity at all. And about a year ago, Sam was in a conversation with someone about Christianity and realized he had never actually read the New Testament. He had exposure to the stories in the Old Testament, but never read the New Testament and didn't really know the stories. So he sat down to read it, and he read it straight through. And as he was telling this, his eyes, they just lit up with a spark. He talked about how Jesus treated people and all the lessons that Jesus taught. And he said, and I quote, "As I read this, I just kept thinking, wow, if this is all true, it changes everything." He said, "It's remarkable." And then he continued, "I don't know if it's all true, but a lot of people who were there at the time died because they believed it was true. And that's a pretty good indicator to me." And as he was telling this, his speech was sped up, and he had this real excitement in his voice. And as I listened to him, I kept thinking, what a gift to read these stories for the first time. You know, how amazing to be knocked over by the stories of how Jesus loved people. And here's the challenge for those of us who have been in the church for a long time. Familiarity can dull our sense of wonder. The stories of Jesus become so known to us that we skim over them. We've heard them so many times that they lose their impact. We stop seeing Jesus. And our love can grow stale without us even realizing it. And this is why Sam's excitement was so fun for me. He spoke about Jesus in the New Testament with a sense of awe, as if he had just discovered the most beautiful thing in the whole world. And I think he had. The question for us is, how do we recapture that? How do we get back to seeing Jesus as if for the first time? And how do we allow ourselves to be captured by the wonder of it all? So I made a list, as I do, of some things that we can help us break out of our routines and attempt to see Jesus again. One, I think we can engage with Scripture with fresh eyes. You know, thinking about Sam reading the Scripture and hearing it for the first time, sometimes doing something as little as changing the translation that you're reading out of. You know, if you're used to the NRSV, go pick up a different translation. Maybe pick up the Message, which is more of a paraphrase, and read it again and see if you hear it differently. Or use practices like Lectio Divina, where you meditate on a passage, just a couple of very short verses, right? And ask God to reveal something new to you. 2, step outside your comfort zone. Serve in a ministry or volunteer in an organization that really challenges you. Because I think seeing Jesus in the faces of the lives of others, it rekindles our faith, and it reminds us of his transformative power. 3, one of my favorites, practice silence and stillness. In the busyness of life, take time to sit in silence, asking Jesus to make himself known to you. And sometimes seeing Jesus, it just requires us to slow down, to stop, and to make space for him. 4, look for Jesus in creation. Spend time in nature and reflect on God's handiwork. And 5, revisit the radical teachings of Jesus. Take time to just meditate on the extraordinary things that Jesus taught. Loving our enemies, serving others, and trusting God's abundance. And let these truths shake you out of any complacency. And I think that one way to make these experiences even more meaningful is to take time to journal. So writing things down helps us to process and internalize them. So I think that when we journal, it slows us down and it tells our body and our mind, wait a minute, this is important, take this. And for me, journaling has, over the many, many years, been a way for me just to go deeper, especially when I'm thinking about beauty or trying to get sort of an insight out of Scripture. So if I write about a sunrise or the intricacy of a flower or something I've learned from Scripture, it just helps those moments penetrate my heart and my soul. Without writing, I think that those experiences would just pass me by, right? And they don't have a lasting impact. They can be good for that second, but then I don't have them deep inside for recall. So this week, I'm going to give you an assignment. Take time to journal one thing. that helps you see Jesus anew. It could be an experience in nature. It can be a moment of service or a teaching of Jesus that challenges you. Write about it. Write what you see. How does it make you feel? And how might it be Jesus inviting you into a deeper connection with him? Let the act of writing draw you closer into his presence. So my prayer for all of us is that we meet Jesus again as our first love, that we allow ourselves to be astonished by his life, his teachings, and his presence, that we fall in love with him all over again, not just because we've heard the stories, but because we truly see him. Just as the disciples did that day in Cana, may we have moments where we truly see Jesus, really see him, and believe. And may that belief ignite a love and wonder that never grows stale.